weekly harness racing fixes with you again. The box seat, of course, brought to you in association with Woodland Stud, standing betters delight, What the Hill, Sweet Lou, list goes on and on. Michael Guerin, as I say, evening to you. Interesting old weekend we've just had.
It was. Hi everybody, hope you had a good weekend. It was interesting on both codes fronts. They've just had the galloping sales, which is interesting heading into our harness sales. You mentioned Woodlands. They'll be huge players in Auckland. But what we saw over the Tasman was something we've seen about once a season for the last 3 or 4 seasons. And we get so used to on this show and in other harness racing areas, Greg, an All-Stars domination. Well, this was the other side, the All-Stars arse kick. And they got their ass kicked all over Melton the other night, predominantly by other New Zealanders. So it's really opened up this carnival, which has both the Hunter Cup and the Great Southern Star coming up on Saturday night. Yeah,
looking forward to talking about previewing those races, but also reviewing what happened on Saturday night, including catching up with Anthony Butt, who had another stellar occasion driving 2 Group 1 winners on the evening. But before we get to that, have a look back at Mark Shard, of course, the Kiwi. Trained by Barry Purdon, had Zachary Butcher in the bike. This is the Casey Classic, a key lead-up to the Hunter Cup this week, and this is what he did.
Cash and Flow led. Mark Shard's eating into the margin. Cash and Flow getting weary. Mark Shard cutting it down. Mark Shard got up. Mark Shard reeled in Cash and Flow. Good effort, my Kiwi mate, for third from 888. Then the
Michael, brilliant performance from him, and you just felt from the top of the straight that Zachary Butcher was sitting pretty in the right spot, chasing down the X-Pac Kiwi and Cash and Flow. And bar what happened on New Zealand Cup Day, where clearly he had an issue with an abscess, his form's been very, very good.
It has. I don't think many of us thought last year we were going to get this version of Mark Shard back, because he was a Group 1 winning 2-year-old, and at 3 he wasn't overexposed. And then I thought, well, is he really going to live up to this? Last year Barry took the hopples off for a couple of starts and tried to regain the horse's confidence, and they mucked around and you know, just worked away on him. Barry never lost faith. I did. I'm not sure that Zach expected this horse to turn up, but he's come back a different horse this season, Greg. He's hit the line really hard in most of his runs. He was only less than half a length away from winning the Inter-Dominion. And after this performance the other night from the outside of the gate, or from a bad barrier draw, excuse me, he's drawn barrier 2 in the Hunter Cup this week coming up. At the moment, I think the 2 best New Zealand-based drivers in Australia are Natalie Rasmussen and Zach Butcher. Zach Butcher drives Australian tracks really well, particularly in Victoria. I think this horse can win the Hunter Cup, which I would not have thought could happen a year ago, or even 6 months ago. What did you make of the run? Because he was strong to the line, not fast, strong.
Oh, I loved it. He showed a terrific staying prowess, something that we've seen in a Dominion final, and a couple of other times in his career, but he's really strengthened up. He's suited to that hard racing, and when they break 153 mile rate wise, you've got to be a good stayer, and that's exactly what he is. He comes up with a beautiful barrier draw. Just before we get into this market, the big loser out of the Casey Classic was obviously the fixer.
Yeah, they've had concerns since he stood on the shoe in the Cambridge Flying Mile, and Mark wasn't confident going into the Casey Classic. He was favourite, which is really awkward because almost all the All-Stars horses start favourite for almost everything, and they're not all going to win because their strike rate, even if it was 50%, which it's not, but even if it was, that still means they lose half their races. So he was disappointing. The run didn't suit him, but he was disappointing. And he's now out of the Hunter Cup. That was Mark's decision. No Hunter Cup. He's heading to the Pure Steel on the same night in a weaker field. I think it's a confidence thing. I still haven't seen many great versions of the fixer this season. I've seen some good ones. Inter-Dominion Grand Final was really good. But a couple of times, horses like Cruz, Bromac, and obviously Self Assured led and just ran away from him. So I'm not saying by any means has he finished. Absolutely not. But I also don't want to be backing him to win any big races anytime soon. Mark Shard really improved, lots to like about that. 888 was really good, actually probably driven out of his comfort zone a little bit as he needed to be because he was drawing wide in a small field, he needed to head forward. These aren't the best New Zealand horses, but I don't think the Australians are that strong. So I think we've got horses here who can win the Hunter Cup, Greg, without needing to be the best, because Australia doesn't have an outstanding pacer at the moment.
No, AG's White Sox, who won 2 weeks ago, of course, he's drawn the second roll. Just have another look at that market, just to give you an idea of where things are at, in case you didn't see it before.
We'll go through them, Greg. First of all,
Older Orlando, flying, barrier 1.
9 of the 13 are New Zealand horses, X or still trained here. Ultra Orlando's got barrier 1, no driver yet. Anthony Butt's in the mix to drive him potentially. Anthony has won 7 Hunter Cups. He has gate speed, as does stablemate Cash and Flow. Now, King of Swing, the former Breeders' Crown winner, is an emergency, so take him out in your mind. So Cash and Flow, Ultra Orlando have the ability here, with the New Zealanders all around them, to head forward and try and manipulate the race to their own devices, which would be lead trail. But Mark Shard's got good gate speed. Chase Auckland's got steady gate speed, and Triple Eight's outside them. I don't think they can go back from here. I can see the New Zealanders being prominent early. We'll get to Lochinvar Art in a second. AG's White Sox, the horse who has been badly affected by the draw, Greg, but first night of the Inter-Dominions, we did see him for one of the few times in his life come from off the speed and close really strongly. So I think it's a really interesting and even Hunter Cup. Lochinvar Art will show you later, but he's a horse who's emerged badly cruelled by the outside barrier draw. Bling It On's back in there too. San Carlo into Mildura for a win. It's a race where you can make a case for 8, maybe 9 of the horses in the field. So really good race, even though it probably doesn't have a champion in it.
11:30 on Saturday evening for that one. The Great Southern Star, that's $500,000. That's the AG Hunter Cup. The Great Southern Star is worth $250,000, and the Dullard Cup, of course, was held on Saturday night. A horse that had been placed in it twice and placed in the Great Southern Star twice. In fact, he hasn't missed a place. Now in 8 starts over there, Temporale produced this performance, Michael, which was absolutely as good as he's ever gone.
Well, people would watch this and think, why is he in green colours? They're actually Bernie Hackett's colours. The co-trainer, Bernie, of course, with Michelle. So in Australia, the horses can't wear the same colours, and it's probably a good thing. Chris Alford catch driving here. They burned up front, and he just went straight past them. Now, if you'd never seen Temporale, you'd go, wow, how do they beat this in the Great Southern Star this week? He's got a second line barrier draw. He'll need a new driver because Chris Alford is committed to Wobbly, one would presume, trained by his wife. So he was super. You're right, he's been excellent during this his entire Melbourne career. But a couple of questions here. We need to get to Oscar Bonavina. Started really short, as he tends to do. And he didn't have much luck. He had to work around them in the middle stages and showed really good speed here. This is starting the last lap. But for a horse who has this sized wrap on him, he was disappointed because he didn't finish in the top 3. Mark Purdon has suggested he was too kind to the horse, and therefore he'll screw him down this week and he'll be fitter. But Greg, he's going to need to be, because he gets outside the leader here, he shows that wonderful speed he's got, but 3 or 4 other horses run past him.
Yeah, that's right. And here, now, you hoped he'd relax, and to be fair, he looks like he did, but he hasn't quite got to that hype yet. And I think we've been a little bit unfair on him as well. We've all expected him to just line up in these open class races, a la what Mombay did at the same age, and it hasn't quite happened yet. But this wasn't ideal leading into a $250,000 Group 1 the following week. It's not the sort of performance that would give you confidence that he could win this week.
No, and he's favourite too. He's got barrier 4 this week. So let's get to the absolute nuts and bolts of this. He is very, very fast and very, very good and incredibly promising. But the 3 biggest tests of his career, that was one of them, he's been beaten. Dominion, willing to forgive, not his fault, had a gallop in traffic early. National Trot sat parked, couldn't run past stablemate Winterfell, which is fine, but also Majestic Man, who's in this race. And then he's been beaten out of sight the other day. Now that might be trainer error, Mark is saying it is, but we know how good he is, but he's yet to prove to us he can just turn up and beat these horses because he's had 3 chances to do it.
Michael, front row. Let's have a look at the market for it. Enormous speed here. Red Hot Tooth, massive metro who galloped at the 600. Spoke to Todd Mitchell about that. He said he just got a bit runny a couple of times in the race, and obviously the worst case of that was when he rolled into a gallop. He's got barrier 2. Tornado Valley likes to run the gate very quickly. Of course, then you go wider out to the likes of Tough Monarch, who we've seen plenty of. Dance Craze directly behind Red Hot Tooth is very interesting too, and Majestic Man with his early speed has been well and truly crawled by this draw again.
He has been, but I would say that they should roll along here. Now, Red Hot Tooth will get crossed by Tornado Valley, and I think he would stay there and lead. In fact, I'm absolutely certain it would. So Oscar Bonavina, Mark was saying last night, pop outside the leader and then hope the cover comes. And you hope the cover comes from a good horse like a Tough Monarch, or maybe a Majestic Man moving early, or McLovin, and then you hope they put the pressure on. He can win, Oscar Bonavina. No pot on him at all, just the hype gets really big sometimes, and when you back a horse with hype, you want a dividend back. And in the 3 biggest races, you haven't got a divvy back. So, interesting test for him this week. Tornado Valley around that track leading, won the Inter-Dominion. This is probably a stronger field.
He's virtually unbeatable at that track, regardless of level.
Usually it's been...
This is a bit deeper though.
Exactly. Usually it's been a lot weaker fields.
Yeah.
Red Hot Tooth can't come off his back and beat him, I wouldn't have thought. Dance Craze is very good, but 3 deep on the markers is a tricky place to win in this field. And then I really think Temporale, Majestic Man, is still in play. I really do, because if they burn or there's any pressure, there are horses who are good enough to come off a 3-wide trail and do something special. It's a really good race. I can see it. I think it's going to be an interesting night because I don't know who's going to win these races, and there's probably 6 or 7 horses who could win that, and maybe 8 or 9 who could win the Hunter Cup, Greg. And that's something we may be lacking harness racing sometimes, is that depth of winning chances. So, with all that in mind, who are your Hunter Cup and GSS picks?
I'm going to go each way Chase Auckland. I think he might end up in the right spot, so I'm happy to be each way on him. And I'm hoping Oscar can bounce back, but I'm happy to be each way Majestic Man. You?
Probably Mark Shard, but could just as easily be Chase Auckland. I think the concern is they get to a handy position and get pushed back when the others come, but Mark Shard might be able to run the gate and get involved. Trotting race, Tornado Valley picks himself because he's the leader, and this has been a mad carnival for leaders, but I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised if Temporale did it again. I'm not sure he's going to drive Temporale. By the way, Josh Dickey's picked up the drive on McLovin in that race as well, so I'll go Temporale each way because I think there's some value there. But yeah, the one word of warning is, Greg, leaders have completely and utterly dominated this carnival, as we're about to see with the Oaks and the Derby.
Yep, and this race, no better example than the Bonanza. Lochinvar Art, that's self-assured, trying to get on his back. Michael, the time here is unreal. A mile rate of 1:48.6 for the 17:20, and he just kept on running this horse. Now, we were talking about this prior to our show today in the green room, how very quickly at Menangle the speed and the times they were running was electric. That hasn't been the case at Melton, but on Saturday night I reckon a lot of things changed.
I do. I think once they break the 150 barrier, and this is the first time the 150 mile rate barrier has been broken in Victoria. There's David Moran who trains and drives the horse. Once that happens, people think, well, I can do that too. I can go out there and just serve it up, and I'm not going to wait for these horses, and we're going to Americanise our racing. And I wouldn't be surprised if they do the same thing 3 or 4 more times in the next 12 months in the right fields. He's always been a really good horse. He was incredibly luckless as a 3-year-old last season. Nothing went his way. And it shows that when you get on the speed and you charge, even very good horses like Self-Assured struggle to beat you. Now, 1:48.6 is almost 2 seconds inside the fastest ever mile rate out of Victoria. Self-Assured to the $1.10 punters is disappointing because he's been beaten. But of course he sat parked at 1:48.6, so he's probably gone at least as good as the winner covering extra ground. So Greg, he's lost nothing, but again, when the hype is that big, anything but a win is a bleeding nose because the punters lose money on it. So It's interesting to see how he reacts to that self-assured, because he'll now have to go to Sydney to qualify for the Chariots of Fire, because the winner qualified, he won't. And even if he gets to Sydney and he bulks up and he loves it, he's still got to try and maybe sit parked outside that horse.
There's a very much Lazarus field to this, that in the shorter course races, he's vulnerable because he doesn't have the early speed to dominate, does he?
That's almost all New Zealand horses when they go to Australia. Not many of ours can just jump on the speed and play the bully, which means you are getting bullied. And some of them can get away with it. But it's not an easy way to win races at 148.6. Let's not also just think about self-assured. The winner's a very good horse.
Oh, he is.
He's got barrier 7 this week and it comes into barrier 6. Now, what you find with those type of horses is often the longer trips will find them out because they're not used to the rough and tumble and getting into that oxygen debt, then going another lap. So I can't back him to win this week, but maybe he's an emerging horse. Maybe he's the Jilliby Kung Fu.
He's the X factor.
Well, the Jilliby Kung Fu of this crop. You know, Jilliby Kung Fu came out of this race 2 years ago, went to the Miracle Mile, missed the 146.9. He set up for my field marshal by a nose. So let's not just think it's all about our horses, because the Kiwis have dominated this carnival, and we're about to talk to one of them. He's a very serious horse in his own right.
Yep, no doubt. And right on cue, joining us online is the king of the Grand Circuit himself, and Anthony Butt. Ants, thanks so much for your time, and congratulations on what was another stellar night for you, not only in the driving ranks, but training as well.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Yeah, no, really big thrill. You know, not easy to do, you know, win the days and aces over here. So, you know, really prep for all the connections.
Before we have a look at both of those races, how different is it these days? I know you had your stint training back here in New Zealand, but now with Emilio and Mary Rosati being their trainer, if you like, to be able to win a derby with lineup, gee, it must be so different preparing them during the week and then getting that opportunity to steer them in the races. Talk me through that.
Yeah, definitely, Greg. Well, as you know, like, driving's pretty easy. You just rock up and jump in the cart and hand the reins back afterwards. And but yeah, training, you know, it's 24/7 virtually. You've got to, you know, a lot to think about, and you've got to make sure that, you know, the T's are crossed and I's are dotted and that kind of thing. And but no, we've got a good team around us, and you know, it's got some lovely horses, and Emilo's been really good to deal with. He's sort of just let us do our own thing, and hasn't worried us too much that side of it. So, you know, we've had a free rein pretty much. So it's, you know, really satisfying to get a result like this sort of so early in our, you know, relationship with him.
Anthony, we know the horse pretty well. He finished third in the size stakes and went great. But to be fair, his next couple of runs weren't at his absolute highest level. Were you surprised by A, the win the week before, and B, how he dominated this derby? I know you had the barrier draw to work with as we have a look at his derby victory now. Let's have a look and just see how dominant he was. Were you surprised?
Well, I was probably more surprised the week before. You know, I knew he was right up with the best. You know, his size stake run was very good at Eddington. He led up and, you know, one change sat in his back and, you know, it didn't lead him all that far. So I knew he wasn't far away, but he just sort of got to Aussie and, you know, thrived and, you know, everything went carefully with him. He came over in great condition from Ray Green. Had done a, you know, fantastic job with him prior to us getting him, and, you know, it was pretty easy, really. Everything went right, and but yeah, you know, his heat one was, you know, really good. He had to fight off Mark Purdon's one early, and then, you know, he had to burn up the gate, then fight off Mark Purdon's, and then still won really easily. So, you know, then to come out and do it in the final when you got a horse like Governor John sitting in the 1-1 all the way, you know, it was a pretty big effort.
Anthony, congratulations, mate. I know it's a big deal when you are also involved with Dr. Susan, who we'll see shortly. How big an advantage is it the fact that our horses have had a hard summer of racing to get ready for these 2,700 metre classics, whereas the Australians, a lot of them are coming in cold?
Yeah, you know, we talked about it on the radio like the other day, didn't we? But, yeah, I think it's crucial. You know, they had that great preparation through the spring into the Size Stakes final, then up to Auckland, you know, for the races up there. And, no, it shows. Like, I was on the other side of the fence as well with Perfect Stride. Like, I could only sort of get 2 or 3 runs into him before the Victoria Derby, and, you know, the races just kept falling over. You know, I think I nominated 8 or 9 times in a row, and the races kept falling over. So, yeah, the Kiwis, you know, it's got a great system over there, you know, this time of year, and I think, you know, that hard racing, it definitely benefits them.
Anthony, that mentions something interesting, which is the change to the Breeders' Crown. We'll get to Dr. Susan in a second. The Breeders' Crowns made it really hard for the Australian horses because they raced deep into August, then they had to pull back and get ready post-Christmas for these type of derbies. The Breeders' Crown's now moving to November, which means effectively our horses and their horses after the Vic Bred or the New South Wales Breeders' Challenge can be in the paddock in June. Is that a good thing?
Well, I think it was a no-brainer, Mick. You know, like we've all been to the Breeders' Crown the last few years. The weather's been atrocious, you know, cold. They don't get a crowd. Yeah, I think it was the right move to move it. They sort of had to get into the summer months, and you know, I just hope it doesn't encroach on the New Zealand Cup meeting too much, because I think we're all going to work together and get round it all. But you know, hopefully it all works. You know, I think the period after the Melbourne Cup Carnival, there's a nice break there for harness racing to take that slot, you know, between sort of Melbourne Cup meeting, New Zealand Cup meeting, and then Christmas. So, you know, I think it'll fit in really well. It is going to have it's going to split the Breeders' Crown, the Sire Stakes final at Addington if they continue to have it at that time of year. So, but then saying that, there wasn't a lot of New Zealand two-year-olds used to come over anyway. So I really think there's more positives than negatives about it.
Let's move on to Dr. Susan and her performance to win the Oaks. Of course, the week before, Stylish Memphis had her measure, but you had the barrier draw to operate from, Anthony, and she was very strong. I know Stylish Memphis was outstanding, but your girl just kept on a kicking here.
Yeah, she's really thrived since she's come to Aussie as well, and again had that hard racing through Auckland, in December, and come over in great order, and Cran and Nathan, they've done a super job with her. She's really, thrived since she's been here and been staying here with us, and hadn't missed a beat. But yeah, it was a great run, when the barrier was set up well for her, and when I had a look, a lap to go on the big screen, and Mark was still well back. I thought it was time to get going and make it really tough for Stylish Memphis. So, they went 26-2 down the back, and Stylish Memphis was a fantastic run because she did all the work trying to get up to me, but my main aim was to just go fast enough so that she couldn't get up to me, and then you just got to hope you hold her off up the straight.
And the Classic Roadshow moves on to Sydney next. Do you expect some new players to come into these races, the New South Wales Oaks and New South Wales Derby, and will they be tougher for the horses you've been driving because the Australians may catch up fitness-wise?
Yeah, but it's hard to say, Mick. I don't think there's too many new ones that haven't raced so far to come out of the woodwork. With the Auckland Carnival on at the same time, I don't think too many more Kiwis will come. So, no, I think we've pretty much seen, most of the best ones down there. And I'm not expecting, there will be some, but, I think the fields will be, reasonably similar.
And people are looking at this and they go, wow, that's really cool. Line up and Dr. Susan can go across there and win big money. If I'm a person sitting in New Zealand watching this show and I think, wow, would my horse be any good at Menangle? And can I send it to Anthony Butt or Tim Butt or whoever? What sort of horses are best suited to go across there, and what sort of horses aren't suited to go across there?
Yeah, well, I think you need a horse that's, one of the races in New Zealand, Mick. With your handicapping system, they seem to... they seem to find their marks pretty quickly in New Zealand, and, I don't think that's anyone's fault. I think it's just purely a population thing, lack of horses and, things like that. So, yeah, you definitely need a pretty good horse at Menangle. Like, we're just going 150, 151, 152 every day of the week here. So, it probably suits tougher horses a little bit like America. Sometimes the speedy sort of squibs can get found out a bit here, but I think the biggest thing, the advantage we've got is the population, and we can, when we, they do the nominations for Menangle on a Saturday night, they can get four races out of one pool of horses, so they split them up on their ratings and what they've won the last 5 starts. So it works really good, and but yeah, you need a pretty good horse, and I definitely think they've need to have won a few in New Zealand.
Anthony,
did you get a Hunter Cup drive, Ants? Have you jumped on one for the Hunter Cup, which you've won 7 times before?
Yeah, I think I'm driving one of Luke McCarthy's, either Ultra Orlando or Cash and Flow. So I think Tony Mack's got the first pick, being the brother, so that's fair enough. So I think I'm driving whatever one he doesn't pick, so that'll be good. And I think I'm also driving temporarily in the Great Southern Star, so he's a really nice pickup drive too.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, just before we let you go, there's a couple of things I want to talk to you about. First of all, you'll be coming to the yearling sales. I haven't talked to you about this. Lot 74 is named Shell Shock. He's a full brother to Lineup, so I'm picking that your man might be interested in that. And lot 239 is a full brother to Dr. Susan too in the Christchurch sale, so 17, 18, 19. This couldn't have come at a better time, Anthony. This should give Emilio plenty of confidence, not that he needed some to come to the New Zealand sales.
No, that's right. Yeah, he's all excited. He's really on a high at the moment, and things are going really well with the stable, so that's making him happy too. And but yeah, he'll be there with all guns blazing. I don't know if I'll be too involved. He likes to do his own thing and pick his own horses, and I know he works quite closely with Ray Green and John Street, in the New Zealand sales. But he'll have his ones picked out that he likes, and it'll be great for the vendors. Not so good for the people who are trying to bid against him, I'd say. But yeah, he's one of those guys. If he finds one he likes, he's pretty happy outbid.
Michael, you spotted something online. Very good friend of Anthony's and classic Grand Circuit driver Gavin Lang. We've got something nice that people might want to contribute to.
Yeah, and I know you dedicated your win on Dr. Susan to Gavin, who's a close friend of yours and of ours as well. And I see a GoFundMe page has been set up for Gavin because he needs an expensive treatment brought in from America for his battle with a very rare form of cancer. Great to see the harness racing community getting behind him, and already I think about $25,000 raised for Gavin. He's kept his illness pretty quiet. He's kept to himself quite a bit over this, Ants, but he's a wonderful bloke, Gavin, and I think anybody involved in harness racing who's enjoyed a moment of his brilliance could probably get involved in this.
Yeah, definitely, Mac. It's a really sad time for us all over here. We've all been great mates with Gavin. Tim and I stayed at his stables, all our lives, basically, with all our good horses, Laurel Creek and Mr. Feelgood, Mr. DG, those sort of horses, Stunning Cullen. So he's been a great mate of ours, and but also a fantastic competitor. He's one of the best drivers I've ever seen. And, this come as a pretty big shock to us all. We met up after the Breeders' Crown on the Sunday and had dinner and a few drinks with him. And, we'll sort of, come out of the woodwork, out of the blue about a week or two later. So, we're all feeling it. But as I said, it's a great initiative to do this. He's been advised to get some treatment from America. It's very expensive, and I think he's got 3 courses of it. So, as the Caduceus Club have got this GoFundMe page now, and hopefully we can all rally and, raise the money, to pay for this treatment. And I said I'd just ask anyone that's ever backed Gavin or, watched him or admired him or had a horse with him or anything, have him drive for you, just dip into your pocket and put a little bit in because, we can't lose a legend like this.
Well said, Ant. Thanks so much for your time. All the very best on Saturday night, and go well.
Thanks, Greg. Good
Right.
luck.
Yep, that's Anthony Butt. And don't forget also on Saturday night, Bella Montana's come up with a nice barrier draw in the ladyship.
Hasn't she? What? Just going back to Ants, when Ants left New Zealand because Dexter and Blair had taken over as our premier drivers, and then you obviously had plenty of great drivers in the north, it's easy to forget about people. You forget, you watch him at Menango on a Saturday night, you go, it's good to see Ants win a race, and Tim. But you forget what a great horseman he's been. And when he took off down the back straight with Dr. Susan, he gave Mark Purdon no chance of winning that race with Souls Memphis. No chance. He outdrove. He drove against one horse and he beat it. He's just a wonderful driver. And I'm glad he's getting the opportunities to show that, because often someone will move away and they don't get in with the right people or whatever. It's hard to get good horses. That's a huge
Not the case,
moment.
is it?
Well, set him up nicely for the next 5 years. And if people watching this at home go, "Well, I know Ants. He's a good communicator."
Definitely.
There's a little lesson in that, because a lot of people in harness racing are a little bit shy and they don't communicate that well. And owners hate that.
All right.
So I reckon it's good. The Gavin Lang thing, Gavin's a great guy. You probably haven't met him because he's quite a shy person as well. Really nice guy, and they're going through a tough time, him and his family. So if you win 5 or 10 this week, just chuck it in if you can, because the GoFundMe page is there, and one day it could be you.
Exactly. We'll take a short break here on your box seat with Woodland Start, of course, and when we come back, it's time for us to have a look at the domestic action, both last week and what's on this week. Welcome back into your box seat. Just before we get into the Inangahua Cup, Harness Racing New Zealand have a new media man in Dave DeSoma, well known, of course, for his exploits with TV1 and more recently, in the last decade or so, maybe 15 years, TV3. So I reckon a really good appointment.
I don't know Dave, but I know his work and it's very good. And I think it adds a component because they have 3 writers who write for them, myself, Johnny and Garrick. So they're well covered writing-wise, but Dave's very good with video. People being television tend to be, and a lot of people like to see those videos. And there's only so much we can show you here on trackside, so he'll be able to get video components and stories and behind-the-scenes stories. So, look, I think it's a really good appointment. You speak well about the guy. I think it's great to have him coming on board. Yeah,
decent bloke. Speaking of Dave, what about Dad and Dave, who went round, of course, in the Inangahua Cup? He's been a busy old horse, this very smart 4-year-old. Led them up here with Brent Barclay aboard. That's Franco Santino, who began that quickly. It got itself into the trail from 10 metres. Cast a shadow out wide there, and Heisenberg just to his inside. Nandolo's not in the picture, there he is there now. Now, he missed away, and Heisenberg had to sit parked. But he just kept on running, Dad and Dave. A 2-minute mile rate. He's won half a dozen races and he's honing in on 100,000. He's raced by Dave McHughes, the mine host at the Yoldhurst, of course, Tim himself and Tim's father, John. So a special horse for the family, and that bloke, Brent Barclay, just another example of his skill in the bike.
Prime example that give a guy like Brent Barclay or plenty of other drivers in the Deep South the right horse and they could win the right races. It's just really hard for them to get on the right horses because the Canterbury horses come down and win so many of the races. I've always liked this horse. He was a really good 3-year-old, and Tim Trathan rolled the dice and came north to those really strong 3-year-old races, and he got his butt kicked in the Derby last year.
Yeah, he raced in both Derbies.
But look, it shows how hard it is to win those Derbies, but he'll end up close enough to open class. And then, like so many horses before him, the question is, do you retain and race, which I hope they do?
Well, they've had some decent offers for him, but, you know, Tim's always wanted to have a good horse. He sold a few along the way, but racing this with his dad and his good mate, Dave McHugh, I think this horse is here, unless there's ridiculous money for him.
I hope so. I think there's a way you should attack open class horses, and that is, yes, if you want to race in the New Zealand Cup, and they can tab, so they would love to race in the New Zealand Cup, excuse me. Yes, by all means do that. And you're probably not going to win them. But say to yourself, I'm going to target the early season races, I'm going to target Kaikoura, I'm going to target these races down south. And then if you want to go to the big dances to say you had a horse in the big race, by all means do that. I think that's the smart way to do it. If you follow the same path as the All-Stars horses, you're not going to win any races. So I think there's a way to retain these horses, and the question comes down to, if you get offered your 150, is cash in the hand better than cash won over a long period of time?
Buster Brady comes to mind, exactly that type of horse. Jock Austin did what he wanted to do, had a horse in the New Zealand Cup and then was able to sell it afterwards, so maybe this horse
I think a lot of people
is similar.
Are finding now with horses, for example, Mark Shard. Somebody says to me, Mark Shard, a year ago, I would have said, yeah, okay, sell him. But if you hold on to them, there's that many races. You can eat 10 here, 20 there, 30 there. And if it's not costing you a lot of money because you train your own horse, you can win your 150 or 200. And that's the question. It comes down to, do you want that money now or do you want it over the period of time? And over that period of time, you can have the fun. So I wouldn't be surprised if we start to retain a few more horses because there are so many places for them to go. And there's no major races in New Zealand for open class paces for about 2 or 3 months here, which is why the triple weights and those horses have gone to Australia. But you can eke out nice money at those 20s and 30s and 40s. I still think it'd be great to maybe spread some of the love around and have a good $50,000 race in February and a couple of 50s in March so other horses can win them. But also that comes down to programming. I think we need to have more races that Group 1 horses are ineligible for. If you said Group 1 horses can't race here, then the Derby winners can't turn up.
Garrard's Premier Mears Championship is Addington Raceway on Friday night. It's at Group 2 level, and the market looks like this. We see Princess Tiffany for the first time since the harness jewels. $1.40 is the price for her. She's trolled up really nicely. We'll get to one of those shortly. Changes good from the inside was good last week. The likes of Press for Time has come a long way in a short time. Of course, trained by Tom Baggery, has Bob Butt in the bike again. Wainui Creek, who won the Breeders' Race on show day at Addington. The first leg of a $100,000 bonus, this being the second leg. I think it's the North Island Breeders in March. So if she wins all three, Michael, she can win that $100,000 bonus. In saying that, if she wins the Breeders in 2 weeks' time, it's a Group 1 race, exactly what you were just talking about, that would make her ineligible, I'm pretty sure, for the last one.
When I mentioned that about Group 1 races, I think that should be seasonally based. I don't think you should exclude horses from races if they won a Group 1 recently because you want good horses turning up. But I think, take for example the Lazarus type horses, you can say if you've won a Group 1 at 3, you can't compete in the Northern Southern Cup.
Yep.
I think that's one way of bunching horses together by programming. You don't need to change any rules, you just need to change your programming. And I think that's where these Dad and Dave type horses and Nandolo can be retained in the country. I think those second level cups can be at that. Not
All
saying
right.
it's second level.
Princess Tiffany.
One of two things will happen here. If she leads, she'll win. But as we saw at Menangle the other day, as we go back to her trial at Rangiora 2 weeks ago, if you don't just hand the lead to horses, then it's harder for them to win. She's the best horse in this race. Maybe she'll sit parked and win. But if she leads, we know she'll win. If she doesn't lead, life becomes a lot tougher for her. And that's what you're taking $1.40. If you take $1.40 and she runs to the front, you'll feel really comfortable. There's a Mitchell Kerr horse there at barrier 1.
Change is good. Yep.
Does like to run nice and hard, and maybe they'll roll the dice. I don't know.
All right.
Are you on track?
Of course, yes, I am.
Can you find out?
I will do that for you.
That'd be good.
Mosdale Art, of course, second in that trial, came out and won on Friday night.
Greg Hope tipped it on the show last week.
Yes, he
said
did.
Back Mosdale Art.
He said this is the one that you need to
Did you
be
back it?
on. No.
I didn't back it. I was on the phone in the race.
Oh,
I was like,
okay.
and it won and paid $2.20.
Well, I tell you who else won last week. Got a beautiful run throughout. Jared O'Reilly knows her very well. The Nicola Livre trained Enchante. She sat in the 1-1. We know she's only got a short sprint, but once she was sitting directly on the hammer of Better's Heart, you just knew she was going to explode up the Addington Straight. She did win, of course, at Roxburgh, leading in the hands of Blair Orange, so she's not just a one-trick pony, but this is definitely when she's at her peak, and Nick's done a really good job with her, and she's going to be...
What we saw in that race was a truck driving across the track because it was going to check on the horse who choked down to the inside Gregory.
Ivana Flyby.
That looked so much worse than it turned out to be.
Yes, exactly.
It ran off the track and I thought, this thing's dead. It just collapsed. And it just choked down and got up and went
she's
back
in
to the
this week,
stables.
so she's bouncing back.
Yeah, we've had a few of these close incidents recently which looked a lot worse than they are, the most important being the Ricky May one, of course, but man, I'm glad she's fine, and she's obviously totally fine because she's in the race this week.
Wainui Creek will be really looking forward to taking a trail behind Changes Good, I'm thinking, because if she can reproduce the stunning performance in the Southern Mears Classic with Neville on show day, then she could be trailing worst case 3 the fence. Wouldn't be a bad spot here.
Trailing would be better,
yes,
because 3 fence behind
It's
Princess
not.
Tiffany means you're giving her 4 lengths. But yep, undoubtedly she has a chance. I spoke to Barry Purdon about her last night. He said it's a step up. But yes, we're going there with a happy horse. By the way, getting back to Bellamontana, who you mentioned earlier, he said barrier 1, Mears race, Melton Saturday night. We'll leave it to Zach, but I think she's got the speed to lead. They'll leave the hopple shorteners in. So he has a chance at a Mears double, either side of the Tasman. Barry heads across there today.
All right, it's a really good program at Addington Raceway on Friday night. There's also a $75,000 pick 6, Michael, which there's about 29 or 30,000 of carry forward money into, so it'll be a good pick 6 for people to be playing into.
Sure what I think of pick 6. I like pick 6s, but I'm not sure whether they should all be terminating or we should run them for 3 weeks and then if they get to 200 make them terminating, because the second I hear terminating I'm really
You're interested. Yeah.
And I'm also not sure whether I like the turbos or not like the turbos. I'm not sure.
Well, maybe you could have a think about that.
I'll do it now?
No.
I'll do it later.
Maybe we'll have a chat about it at another time. We were going to preview...
Do you have an opinion on it?
I like pick 6.
But like, should it get to 200 and be terminated?
Yes,
I think that
I
brings
actually
people
hadn't
in.
thought of it like that, but I actually quite like that
If you
idea.
get to 200 and say, okay, because otherwise...
Well, I think it needs a boost. It needs something to change.
We either need to promote pick 6 or promote the quaddie, but we can't promote both.
Both. Yep.
Because they cannibalise each other.
All right, we're going to take a short break here. I was going to say, Geraldine, we were going to preview, but unfortunately the fields aren't out in time. I've talked about this at length over the years.
I'm sick of hearing about it.
If you get it out on Tuesday, then we can preview them on Wednesday. Anyway, short break for us as we go there. Good day it was on Sunday at the Mott, as it invariably is. This horse has done a magnificent job in the hands of Blair Orange. His name is Baltimore Jack, and he did this. We'll see you on the other side.
One Direction getting through, wide out Mad Luli, Just Holler, One Direction, Baltimore Jack wide out, Baltimore Jack went to the lead, One Direction runs on with Be Mine Tonight, Mad Luli, Baltimore Jack and Blair Orange down to the line. He's going to score the feature. Baltimore Jack too smart, beat Be Mine Tonight, Mad Luli and Just Holler. Next to go by was One Direction, followed in by Miss Daytona. Johnny was next to go by from Payne.
Welcome back into your box seat. As promised, I think it was last week, it must have been because it's the only show we've had this year, we have had the opportunity, or this man has, to catch up with the head of Rita and Dean McKenzie to talk things all harness racing. So let's find out what he had to say.
Dean, there's a feeling in the harness racing community that maybe this bill's been more about thoroughbred racing and there's been less engagement. How have you found harness racing engagement as you've travelled around the country over the last week?
Look, the engagement's been excellent. That view is a natural one because the terms of reference for the Masara review were specific to the thoroughbred code. But what's ballooned from there has been a for all of industry approach to the reform program. So harness and greyhound code bodies, the governors of their sport, have been as engaged in the process from the advisory committee stage right through the various work streams that Rita have been looking after and feeding into the bill. So both those codes have been as engaged and have contributed as much in all aspects as the thoroughbred code.
There seems to be a feeling in harness racing that stakes actually aren't too bad compared to the sister code who have lower stakes and higher expenses. But there is a concern that under a change to Section 16, the distribution to harness racing could diminish. How likely is that?
Look, distribution is a topic that will be around till the end of time. I mean, if you read the 2/3 and Good Time Sugar, the history of the 50-year history of the TAB, they talk of the early years of the TAB where the harness conference chair and the thoroughbred conference chair took alternate slots at the head of the table of the TAB, and how when one sat there, their industry prospered, and when the next one came along, their industry prospered. So distribution is a issue that the industry's been grappling with forever, and it'll always be grappled with. Where we've got to in the process with the bill is that we've been able to take that out of legislation. So in other words, how that is divvied up is now put into regulation so the industry can actually change that more with better flexibility. It has better flexibility to change that as it sees fit. Now that's a completely...
In that situation though, doesn't the more powerful code win? And the more powerful code in this country is thoroughbred racing.
Look, the process is underway to ensure that. So that process has a lot of the codes, or the three codes, feeding into that at the moment. So that was clearly a part of the Masara review, and what came out of that was a recommendation that was reviewed. That was reviewed by Grant Thornton towards the middle of last year. The codes are feeding into that process now. So this bill that you currently hear being discussed around the traps has no relevance whatsoever to that discussion. That's a separate discussion that regulation will be developed to manage that, and I wouldn't want to preempt where that ends up. But what that is a separate process, and the industry will be able to contribute to that process and be consulted on that process when that gets advanced later in 2020.
There'll be people watching the box seat who have fear that because the terms of your engagement in this was that the thoroughbred racing code needed this and this and this, that harness racing is going to get left behind, that harness racing stakes are going to decrease, or its percentage of distribution is going to decrease. Is that likely? Is that possible? Or are those fears unfounded?
As I said earlier, the process with the codes has been excellent, and the contribution that Harness Racing New Zealand have made to that process has also been excellent, and they're fully engaged in it and making strong submissions for the future and health of their sport. All we can do as an agency is ensure that that process is fair, transparent and robust to ensure that everyone gets a fair crack at the whip. So I'm very confident that's occurring, and around Section 16 distribution type equations, that still remains as to where that will end up. But all we can do is make sure that they are heavily contributing, well informed, which they are, and we can get out the other end of that process with at least an acknowledgement that it was a fair process, and whatever the outcome of that may be, that is the best going forward.
You have run the biggest harness racing club in the country out of Addington in the past. You now have also been at the top level of administration for all three codes through your position on Rita. What advice would you give harness racing clubs at the moment?
I would, running a club is under the new bill, if we stick to the framework of the reform program, running a club going forward will have exactly the same challenges as it does now. You won't wake up on the 1st of July and have any different challenges than you have on the 30th of June before the Act actually comes into place. So, well, the bill comes and becomes an Act. So the challenges at a club or a region, like we met with Southern Harness, the Committee of Southern Harness last Wednesday, and I was very impressed with the coordinated approach that they are taking to harness racing in an area which I'm very fond of, obviously, personally, and that seems to have really worked for them down there. They're making sure that they're making every dollar work for them and making harness racing as viable as it possibly can in their region. So my advice to a club is that your challenges will still be the same, and you can always improve how you react to those challenges, and that's a case of learning new things and learning off other people. And as I've always said, the best idea is a copied idea that works. There's plenty of them out there. You just got to go and get them and turn them to what best fits your model and your region and your community, and go forward.
You mentioned a copied idea. That's very important to the conversation about the future of New Zealand harness racing. In Australia, as the galloping industry has ballooned to become enormously more successful, the harness racing industry has not. One has taken space, time and market share off the other. Are you concerned, as an Invercargill boy who's run a harness racing club, realistically and honestly, that can happen here?
Well, each of the three sports have different challenges, and they have different advantages. And harness racing is certainly well equipped for initiatives like live racing and race betting, because of course their races are longer. There's more ability to feed into that, in a 2-mile trot or a 2,800 metre race at Mochikarara or whatever it might be. So that there are specific advantages that harness racing has, and in my time at Addington, we really focused on trying to turn those advantages, those natural advantages that you've got, like live racing, the ability to have live racing, into a tangible revenue stream. Now, that's one thing in the bill that, despite John Massara, despite advisory committee, despite Rita putting forward positive submissions around this to date, the live racing debate, that's currently not something that we're able to do. And in my personal view, and our board's view, is that there's not a lot of common sense when you can bet into a live sport fixture and not be able to bet into a live racing fixture. So they are essentially the same concept, it's just the participants in the field of play, if you like, are different. So I think around the various codes, it is very much focusing on the things that you can control and using them to the best of your ability.
For harness racing participants watching this show, and we do thank you for your time, what should they make submissions on, and how should a submission look? Because for a lot of people, they're not used to writing submissions. They don't write reports. They don't write strategic plans. You do that sort of stuff. They don't. What should it look like, and who should they engage with to make a submission to be taken seriously by a select committee?
Look, Harness Racing New Zealand put out prior to Christmas a document to their clubs asking for feedback on some of these key issues, some of which we've touched on, and that document is freely available. It's a very well measured document that highlights some of the areas that are important to harness racing going forward, and that would be a good source document to read. Again, we had a session with a number of the harness clubs already. We've had forums in the harness strongholds of Invercargill and Christchurch, and also at Cambridge last week. So I saw a lot of harness participants in the room. So I think the ability to be heard is as simple as putting in place the measures that are important to you. And various stakeholders are impacted in different ways, code to code, sector to sector. So it is important to get the information and form your own personal view, because that's the one that matters the most, is what you think. Now, if you agree with certain commentators about certain areas, that's absolutely fine, but that actually doesn't necessarily need to be the case. It's actually about what you think to ensure that you're heard, and at the end of the process, whatever the outcome is, you've been heard.
And a big thank you to Dean McKenzie for making time available for us. We'll have Peter Jensen on the show next week reacting to that, but Michael, can you help us out here? What does the last 8 to 10 minutes all mean?
I think lots of people in harness racing haven't engaged with the Masara report into the Rita racing bill, which will become the new racing laws, what's called a racing act, very much. I think a lot of people see it as a thoroughbred racing initiative, but of course it affects harness racing enormously. The two factors there which are most important are this. The Department of Internal Affairs doesn't want to allow in-play betting. I have no idea why. It's a complete mystery to me. I've looked into it. It doesn't make any sense. If they allow in-play betting, that's a win for harness racing. So I reckon Harness Racing New Zealand and the Breeders' Association, and even you, if you're a serious punter, should say to the DIA, make a submission to the select committee and say, why aren't you allowing this? This is ridiculous.
What's the difference between that and sport?
There's none. There's absolutely none. Under the rules of racing at the moment, the totalisator has to be closed once a race starts, but there's no reason for that. Absolutely none. You can close the tote, then reopen it, which is what Betfair does, reopen as an in-play market. And that's harness racing's a huge winner out of that. New Zealand Trotting Cup, you might take 50,000 of turnover during the race. So if you want to make a submission, and Harness Racing New Zealand have to make a submission saying, why aren't you allowing this DIA? Because Rita wanted it. Second thing is Section 16, which is basically a deal put together a long time ago where harness racing stepped back from some of the Saturdays and some of the prime dates and agreed that galloping should get those if they still get a fair share of the turnover. If they repeal Section 16 and then harness racing's market share or how much money we get from the TAB distribution share goes down, that's going to impact your stakes really dramatically. Now that's the other thing we need to say, hold on, this is not the Treaty of Waitangi. We came to an agreement here, you can't change the rules 15 years later and say it doesn't suit you anymore. Now a lot more work on this channel and in newspapers goes into galloping than harness racing, so it drives more turnover. And we're bringing in much more Australian racing, Melbourne and Sydney, and it drives galloping turnover. But harness racing gave them that space. They said, well, it's okay, we won't race on those days, you go in there. And harness racing already gets bounced to trackside 2 on Saturdays. It does get to go on trackside 1, which it should because it's a domestic product. But a better use of that time is Sydney and Melbourne to drive more turnover. But you can't give them that space and say this is a good idea and agree to go to trackside 2 and then not get your money back. So you need to be out there, again, the big boys, the clubs, the organisations, the kindred bodies saying this is what actually happened and therefore we should be retaining a high share of turnover, even more so than what you think we're allowed, because this is the reason we did it in the first place. And that's the submissions we need to be making at the highest level. If you don't want to engage, that's entirely up to you. But the major bodies in harness racing need to engage vigorously with the select committee process. Submissions close on February the 11th, or we'll get the shaft and it'll happen quicker than you know.
Thank you for that, Michael. Let's move on to what's ahead for you this week in harness racing. Wyndham on Thursday, 8 races there, $453, $20,000 fast track insurance pick 6 there. Addington Raceway, Really good program, highlighted by the $50,000 Group 2 Garrard's Premier Mears Championship. That goes at $8.25, and that pick 6 I was talking about with Fast Track, $75,000 there. Manawatu 9 races, $5.35 to complement that. That's on Friday evening as well, of course. Geraldine, it's the Orari Challenge Stakes. Tailored Elegance was very good at Addington the other night. She's likely to be favourite for that.
And Cracker Hills in that race, Kieran Tomlinson will drive because Brad Williamson goes to Melbourne to drive Majestic Man.
All right, good info there. Meeting 10 races rather, it will be 12:08 on Sunday for the Wyndham Club. And of course, Otaki, it is the Wellington Trotting Cup, $12,000 for that, and the Otaki Cup as well, 12.23, the 9 race program there on Sunday. Saturday night, enormous night ahead. Of course, plenty of Kiwi interest. The coverage kicks off just before 8 o'clock. Group 1 ladyships at 9:32 with Bella Montana. We've talked about the Great Southern Star with all those Kiwi trotting stars, the fixers and the Pure Steel, and then we've got a great chance in a race that we've had an awesome record in, the AG Hunter Cup.
I'm going to pop across and come back next week on the show, and not only we have Peter Jensen, which will be really cool, we'll preview the sales, but we'll try and give you the exact word on how things went in Melbourne and what it means for Sydney heading forward.
All right, what about our Woodlands winner from the weekend? Because this one came out of Invercargill, his name Nikasa. This one by Better's Delight, out of Nicky's Ideal. So a Paul Renwick breed there. Darren Simpson, Brent Barclay combining, and they did this. Another one on the day, of course, for B. Barclay. The other thing I wanted to talk about, Michael, was the Team Teal promotion, which kicks off. And on that, next Thursday, of course, it is the big day for the Amberley Club. And it also marks a year since Margot Nine and Peter Davis had their issue. So they've got a massive day there, a whole lot of giveaways, including a Team Teal promotion. Anything you wear on the day with teal in it, you go in the draw to win a whole lot of prizes. Here's what's happening from the 1st of February to the 15th of March. We've got the ambassadors again, Sam Otley, Ali Barron, Alicia Harrison and Nikki Chilcott. We've got some junior ambassadors as well, so they're adding things to this all the time. And the big night at Addington Raceway, which is Breeders' Night, there's $45 a ticket there. Greg, if you want to get involved.
What else is it?
What else? It is
Valentine's
Day.
See, you can take your missus or your boyfriend or both to the races on Valentine's Day, and money goes to a good cause.
Nice
That's
work,
what you can do.
Yes,
I'm a big Valentine's person.
All right, looking forward to next week's show. We're going to preview some of the horses that are going to the Auckland sale, of course, 17, 18 and 19 of February, so it's not very far away at all. The following week we'll do some South Island ones as well for the Canterbury sale.
Ones. I'm picking the South Island ones. If you have a nice yearling going to the sales and you think you've got a good picture of it, send it to us. Not one of those pictures standing still. Send us a picture of it doing something cool.
We'll see what we can do with it. All right, that's been your box seat for this week. Hope you've enjoyed it. Looking forward to the harness racing week ahead, and we'll see you in 7 days' time.